Great.
You're joining us at a Heterodox Academy webinar on when university investigations of faculty go off the rails, and we'll get started in just a second. Okay, we'll get going. I'm Alice Dreger. I'm a managing editor and senior scholar at Heterodox Academy, and I'd like to welcome you today to this very important webinar on when university investigations of faculty go off the rails. And this will be with Nick Wolfinger, Patti Adler, and Stephen Porter, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. But before we get started, I just want to give a little bit of background on Heterodox Academy. So we asked people to follow the HXA way. Heterodox Academy is dedicated to promoting and protecting open inquiry, viewpoint diversity, and constructive disagreement in higher education. And if you're not familiar with our work, this will actually be a great introduction to it, because these folks are living heterodox lives and paying the prices for that, but standing up for open inquiry and free expression in higher education. So we ask you, as you participate in this conversation, to please follow the HXA way, which means making your case with evidence, being intellectually charitable, being intellectually humble, admitting when we don't know something, being constructive, helping each other make arguments that are better and find evidence that helps us figure out the answers, and to be yourself, to bring your own story and bring your own experiences and your own take on things. I'm going to ask you too to make sure that as you work with us today, you can drop what you want in terms of commentary in the chat, but if you want to ask our panelists a question, drop that in the Q&A box, because I'll be keeping an eye on that to bring those questions. You have multiple opportunities to engage with us at Heterodox. You can subscribe to our newsletter, which is a great way to keep informed about what's going on in higher ed with regard to these issues. You can join our Substack at Free the Inquiry, which I edit for us, and find out, again, lots of news and information and analysis about important issues in higher ed. And you can become a member if you are a graduate student or faculty or staff member at an institution of higher education. It's free, and you can work with us on this important change work. I also just want to mention the magazine that we have, which started in December of last year, Inquisitive, which I edit for Heterodox Academy. It's a way for us to sort of have an intellectual, scholarly approach to the kinds of issues that we're talking about. And the Heterodox has me doing Inquisitive on the basis of themes. So the first issue's theme was the nerve, which these folks have. Second issue, discipline, which they experienced. Third issue on power is coming out in June. Okay, so let's get going. Oh, just one more thing. Registration is open for the Heterodox Academy's conference in June, late 2025. And I do want to mention that there'll actually be a panel on this topic that Nick Wolfinger has put together. That will actually be with DeAndre Poole from Florida Atlantic University and Lee Jussum from Rutgers. So if you're interested in this, that's a great opportunity to follow up and be with us for that event. So just to get started, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Nick Wolfinger, who is Professor of Family and Consumer Studies and Adjunct Professor of Sociology at the University of Utah. He received his undergraduate degree at the University of California, Berkeley, did his PhD at UCLA, both in sociology. His books include Understanding the Divorce Cycle, The Children of Divorce in Their Own Marriages, Fragile Families and the Marriage Agenda, Do Babies Matter? Gender and Family in the Ivory Tower, Soulmates, Religion, Sex, Children, and Marriage Among African Americans and Latinos, and Thanks for Nothing, The Economics of Single Motherhood Since 1980. And finally, the book we're talking about today, Professors Speak Out, The Truth About Campus Investigations. He's also the author of about 40 articles or chapters and short pieces in The Atlantic, National Review, Huffington Post, and other outlets. We also have with us today Patti Adler, who's Professor Emerita of Sociology at the University of Colorado in Boulder. Her myriad research interests span social psychology, deviant behavior, sociology of drugs, sociology of children, sociology of sports, sociology of work, and leisure. Along with Peter Adler, her most recent work is The Tender Cut from New York University Press. Her edited text reader, Constructions of Deviance, is now out in its 8th edition. And after a returning graduate student TA in her large lecture class, which was on deviance in US society, by the way, the most popular class on campus, the student complained about a role-playing exercise routinely used in the course for 25 years The Title IX office, encouraged by feminist faculty members, conducted a secret investigation, eschewing contact with her, and subsequently forced her, an internationally known full professor, to resign on 1 week's notice or face possible termination and loss of retirement benefits. So she's going to be talking about that story today. And then finally, we have with us Stephen Porter, who's a professor of higher education at North Carolina State University and a co-leader of the American Research Team for the Future of the Academic Profession, which is an international survey of faculty to take place in almost 40 countries in 2026. He earned his PhD in political science with a concentration in econometrics from the University of Rochester. And before entering academia, Dr. Porter spent a decade in university administration, culminating in his role as Director of Institutional Research at Wesleyan University. After North Carolina State University targeted him for referring to an academic conference as a woke joke on his blog, he filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the university and ultimately lost the case on appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. He continued his fight to remove DEI language from the university's strategic plan, which gained him national media attention. So I just want to say it is my honor and pleasure to be with these folks today. They are doing such important work to bring forward the problem of faculty investigations on campuses, which so often are done in ways that lack due process, that interfere with academic freedom, and that ruin lives of important scholars. So thank you to all of you for this, and especially Nick for bringing us this very important book, which includes many, many first-person stories of what's happened to various professors in various places. I did want to just read really briefly from the introduction to give you a sense of what the book is about. And then I'm going to ask Nick to tell us a little bit more about why he took on this project. This book reveals an academy under siege, with the attacks coming from across the political spectrum. In conservative states, lawmakers are targeting professors with content restrictions, exemplified by the recent spate of laws purporting to ban so-called critical race theory. Professors have long been a favorite target for conservative activists, and these attacks have exploded in the social media era. On the left, criticism often comes from within the academy itself, as professors find themselves denounced by idealistic students or often younger colleagues. Universities have responded by developing Byzantine bureaucracies for investigating and punishing academic misconduct, often through muddled and opaque disciplinary proceedings. Investigations can last for years, where the professor's reputation besmirched, whether or not he or she is formally exonerated. Long accustomed to the norms of free speech and open inquiry, academics now fear being punished for the slightest transgression, punishment that may entail dismissal from a tenured position. This is the environment that led Vox to pseudonymously publish an article entitled "I'm a liberal professor and my liberal students terrify me" in 2015, but the author got his title wrong. His essay should have been titled "I'm a liberal or conservative professor and all my students terrify me." Professors deserve the opportunity to tell their side of the story. All university stakeholders and society at large should be interested in what they have to say. University disciplinary procedures have high stakes. A tenured professorship and millions of dollars of grant money may hang in the balance. But all too frequently, they make a mockery of the due process that's the hallmark of a liberal society. Academics will want to learn how to safeguard their careers. Campus bureaucracies want fairer processes that better balance competing interests at their institutions, and everyone should be interested in ameliorating the now routine injustice in a central institution of American society. So, Nick, tell us a little bit more about how you approached this book, why you took this project on.
I had never given these moments a second thought until in 2016, I got a phone call from a gentleman who identified himself as my university's OEO AA office. I briefly wondered if he thought I had a drinking problem, but then learned eventually that there was a sexual misconduct complaint against me. And at this point, I'd already been at the University of Utah for almost 20 years, and it had been 20 fairly rough years. I had a very acrimonious tenure case. The university failed to match an external offer. They didn't promote me to full professor the first time I went up. And so my sense was that the university had just found a novel and innovative way to torment me. It was just the university up to its own tricks, and I wasn't helped much when I finally got the complaint. Uh, what had I been accused of doing? Well, almost 20 years before, around 1998, when I came to the university, I often went out with my fellow assistant professors, who were all women, for pizza and drinks, as professors often do. And at one of these events, I was asked to recount the story of my proposal to my first wife. And sorry, I talk like a family demographer. First marriage, second marriage. And in this story, I was asked where I proposed, and I recounted truthfully. And they said it was at a strip club. And so, almost 20 years later, this was part of the complaint against me, that I had recounted to, that I had proposed to my wife at a strip club. And if anyone is listening is scandalized by this, I encourage you to file a complaint against me. The University of Utah makes it easy. There's an anonymous web portal. If you're lazy, there's pull down menus you can use.
So, Nick, how hard was it to
Yeah.
find professors for this work?
Oh, okay. Moving on. It was incredibly easy. So after this, I had volunteered with FACE, a nonprofit that deals with cases like this and does some lobbying. And I had heard stories from there. I went through word of mouth, and finally I went to FIRE's Scholars Under Fire database, which was over 1,400 people. So it was really easy to find people for this work. And in fact, I'm already putting together a list of people for the follow-up book.
And yes, you write in this book about how
Yeah.
some people backed out or were pressured into
Yes.
backing out.
Yes. Yes. So several people I asked, invited to participate, um, were interested, but then declined because they had signed NDAs with their universities, which might meant if they were still teaching, they'd lose their jobs, or perhaps expose themselves to criminal prosecution. I write in the book that one of these people can reasonably be described as the most famous living member of his field, and it is not Noam Chomsky, in case you're wondering. Another person actually completed a chapter and then pulled out. And all these people, this list of 4 people, were from top 10 schools. So
So you
yeah,
could easily
university.
fit
Yeah,
another book, it sounds like.
yeah.
Yeah. Patti, let's go to your story, which you'll tell us about in just a second. I wanted to emphasize how Patti's story really speaks to the way that this is about academic freedom. So in her piece, she writes, threats to academic freedom come not only from the left and the right, but also from institutional authority, as university council is neither leftist nor rightist, but institutionalist in a very limiting, reactive sense. In many respects, the greatest dangers come from establishments that are motivated not by ideology, but by more mundane concerns with risk and brand. And these definitely resonate with issues I've had in my own life with dealing with universities. You all have done just a great job pointing to the ways that these sorts of problems come from almost every direction. So, Patti, do us the honor of telling us about what happened to you.
I have taught for 25 years a 500-person class on deviance in U.S. society. That is the most popular class on campus. I use 5 TAs and 10 assistant TAs who are undergraduates to help personalize a large lecture, class. One of the classes, and probably the most popular class, comes toward the end of the semester on deviant subcultures. And I use the example of prostitution to illustrate the status stratification of a deviant subculture. From escorts at the top and brothels, streetwalkers, crack whores, slave whores, whatever. And to enliven the class when you're doing edutainment for 500 people, I invite people to participate, and I write out scripts for them, that I interview them, and they dress the part. I draw these scripts from sociological research and documentaries, and it's very informative. But I guess sometime during the semester, one of my returning graduate student TAs had complained to the department chair that she thought that undergraduate assistant TAs were being pressured to participate, and that I had a power relationship over them, and that I was using that imbalance of power. So, but she couldn't be a complainant because she never had been a participant. So they went about looking for a participant, and they contacted all my former TAs and assistant TAs, and nobody complained. So they had like a complaint without a complainant. This is from the Office of Discrimination and Harassment, that's what it was called at the time.
Ironically.
But then they couldn't find anything to base this power imbalance on. So then they decided the investigators would attend this role play exercise that they called the skit. Then they decided that they would build a case around the content of the skit, which was a big turn. All of a sudden, they decided that it violated three guidelines, because the male prostitute used street vernacular and referred to his customers as faggots, sexual discrimination, and because this slave said that she was trafficked from Eastern Europe and used an Eastern European accent, it was national origin discrimination. And because the pimp said that he used a combination of emotional and physical coercion, gender. So they, this happened so quickly. I was never informed. I mean, I heard from students that they heard that there was an investigation. So I went and talked to the TA. She said that there was an investigation. I said, any way we could change this. But by that time, it was, I'd seen these committees. I had students who'd been on the accusing and accused side, and I thought that there would be an opportunity for them to interview me, and I would say, I'll change it, I'll drop it, whatever you think, because it's a scary committee. But they never came to me. They never interviewed me. And so then, a week before the end of the fall semester, I got called into the chair's office, and she said that they had a meeting with the deans and the administration, and that I had 1 week to submit my resignation, or I would be, forced into early retirement. I was 62. And, then they met with the university lawyers, who said that the university might be at risk if any one of the thousands of students I had taught over 25 years, 1,000 a year, complained. And they were afraid because, like Penn State, they didn't handle it right away. The university administrators went to jail. And
So they were intimating that you had done something on the level of Nassar or Sandusky, which was
Sandusky. They thought I was like, raping young boys in the shower rooms or something, and that they would be, at risk. So I had to resign on 1 week notice, or else I would, face, lose my retirement benefit, be fired, be at risk from lawsuit, and I had no warning.
So tell us what you did.
I had a meeting with my TAs and assistant TAs and told them it was the end of my teaching career. The last day, I had my usual regular last day class, and then I, at the end, told them how this thing went down, and I cried, and I said, this was a great semester. Thank you all for being such a great class. And, I'm honored to have had you in my last class of my teaching career ever. And then, 100 students came down at the end and cried and told me how I'd changed their lives. And then I guess their parents started calling the dean, started calling the newspaper. They had a giant, protest on the campus. I got letters of support from every sociological association there is, and FIRE. I was in the Chronicle of Higher Education. Jay Leno mentioned me on the Tonight Show, and so it was such an uproar. And of course I had to hire a lawyer. So then, a lot of people pushed for me to come back. And if I were younger, I would have pushed harder.
Mhm.
But I was already 62 and I was, looking at not being there forever. So I didn't want to, and they offered me a buyout that was weak, but still I would keep my health benefits when I retired. And so, I was mixed about it. And then, like the Friday before the semester started, they came and offered me full salary for the next semester if I didn't teach. The dean offered, and then the provost offered me that I could come back and teach the class. So I was torn what to do, and you know, it was really hard, but I felt like because of all the people who had supported me, that I felt obligated to try to fight and
Sure.
come back and to show that I couldn't be intimidated because, an internationally known tenured professor could be like kicked out on a week's notice. They were
Right.
all shivering in their boots. So I came back, but it was a horrible experience. I had to sign all these agreements that I wouldn't sue, and then the lawyers told everybody not to talk to me, and
So your whole life was turned completely upside down by a student who herself did not claim to be harmed at all, was not even a participant in the skit, but who simply suggested that maybe somebody might have been hurt along the way.
right. And when they switched from coercion to content,
Mhm.
that I thought was a huge turning point because it went into the academic freedom content of my class. And in sociology, you're going to deal with race, you're going to deal with class, you're going to deal with sexual orientation, and you're going to deal with power in society, and especially in a class on deviance.
Right.
So
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's a very disturbing story. Let's go now to Stephen's story. And I just want to quote from the dissenting in the appeal portion of his case. So as Stephen will tell us about, he ultimately sued his university and he lost at the appeals level on a 2-1 vote. And this is what the dissenting appeals court judge wrote. Our job is not to appraise the value of Porter's speech or his personal virtue. It's to take the facts as alleged in this complaint, read them in a light most favorable to Porter, and then decide whether he's plausibly stated a claim for relief. So what had happened was the university asked for the case to be dismissed. And drawing all reasonable inferences in Porter's favor, the university threatened his tenure by removing him from his program area because of his protected speech. The university has not yet produced evidence to justify its decision. No such evidence springs forth from the face of the complaint. So Porter's claims ought to survive, and the district court's contrary decision ought to be reversed. This is not a close. So the dissenting judge, the one against the two, felt strongly that the case should proceed. Tell us, Stephen, about what happened. How did you get to that point? What happened to you?
Sure. It's a long story, like it is, I think, for everyone in Nick's book. So I'm a professor in College of Education at NC State, and my specialty area is higher education, and I teach basically quantitative methods courses. And what had happened is that I'd been there about 7 or 8 years, and on my blog, I'd been kind of poking fun at the social justice folks early on. I think kind of the wokeness started to hit around 2014, 2015. And so I had a new department head roll in 2017. Again, I had zero problems up to that point, and she basically targeted me because of my conservative beliefs. The first thing she did when we met is she said, "Well, there's been there was an anonymous climate study where people could report on our colleagues, and I got a copy of this thing redacted. Everyone is like ratting everyone out in this study. It's hilarious." But she said, "You were a bully." And I'm like, "Well, what did I do?" She said, "Well, the only thing I can tell you is that when there was a faculty meeting to discuss a new course evaluation question that asked students to what extent did the course address diversity issues, you made some critical comments about the question." And I pointed out that survey methods is one of my areas and that I didn't scream or anything. I just asked some critical questions, which, as we now know in retrospect, is a terrible, terrible error during that time period. You don't want to be critical at all. So a couple other minor issues happened. The big thing happened the next year. As you said, I referred to our main academic conference as a woke joke on my blog. So that wasn't by itself so terrible. What was terrible is 2 months later at that conference's presidential keynote address, which if you're not an academic at these conferences, there's a huge ballroom with hundreds of thousands of people in it. And the president gives a talk. The president threw up my photo behind her on the stage and lambasted me in my blog post for about 5 minutes. And that causes huge controversy back at NC State. It's like, oh my God, my department head wanted me to have a meeting with the students, which I very wisely declined. And I just kept asking, not sure what's going on. And if they're upset, they should talk to the woman who who did the keynote, not me, right? And so at the end of that year, as she was out the door to go to another institution, in my evaluation letter, she announced I was being removed from the master's program and that I was being assigned a 5th course to teach. So if you're not familiar with how research universities work, we typically have a course load of 4 courses a year. And for a full professor who's still productive in research, it is an extraordinary sanction to assign them a 5th course. I've never heard of it, quite honestly, at NC State or anywhere else for that matter. People may voluntarily take on a 5th course for extra pay or something like that. So the beginning of the next year, I filed a grievance. And the way the university works, the grievance process, which should have been over within a couple of months, it didn't end until 9 months after I filed my grievance. The grievance committee wouldn't bring it forward to a full grievance hearing. They argued that the department had the right to remove faculty from degree programs. And since I had yet to be required to teach the 5th course, that there was nothing to decide on that. So it seemed like I lost, but I felt that it was a pretty big victory in the sense that my dean and department head had to back off on forcing me to teach this 5th course. I think the plan was, as is often the case, to make people's lives miserable. And the idea would be I would quit my job or refuse to teach the course and they could come after me for insubordination. Once I filed the grievance, I could file the lawsuit. Fired my first attorney, luckily found Samantha Harris, which is this great higher ed free speech attorney. And I forgot to mention during the year that I was fighting the grievance, I was excluded from meetings of the PhD program. I'm in a graduate student only department. And because literally like once a month, I'm like in my interim department head's office bitching and moaning about the fact that I'm not being allowed to attend these meetings. I think between that and the lawsuit, they realized that I was not going away. And so my leftist colleagues in my higher education program area all left and formed a new doctoral concentration called Higher Education, Opportunity, Equity, and Justice. And I joked in the book they ought to call it the Porter Memorial Doctoral Concentration because it was clearly it's an almost exact duplicate. I was the only person not invited to join.
It almost reads like a Don DeLillo novel.
It's my non-academic friends. I tell them you have no idea how crazy academia is.
They couldn't vote you off the island, so they voted all of themselves off the island and went to a new island without you.
Exactly. It turns out that actually there's an adjunct faculty member and another colleague in the department who's associated with my area who stuck around. And we're doing fine. It turns out there's a big demand amongst doctoral students who want kind of a traditional training in higher ed, and they don't want the social justice flavored stuff. So my program area has actually survived, lost the lawsuit. I think the issue was, as Samantha had warned me, she said, universities aren't really going after people and firing them outright like they used to. They're now doing what she calls death by 1,000 cuts, which is they do all sorts of things to try and make you miserable, so you quit. And so the reason I bring that up is during the Fourth Circuit of Appeals hearing that I went to, one of the judges who ruled against me basically said, I don't get what the problem is here. This guy still has a job and he still has a salary, which I think illustrates kind of the issue and the success really with this approach, because it's when you fire someone, it's pretty egregious and you have to have a lot of evidence. If you start piling stuff on people, removing them from journals, there's been all sorts of things that happen. It's a lot easier for universities to get away with it. So lost on appeal to the Supreme Court. Other than that, life's been okay. The one irony of the situation is that one of my the kind of the chief instigator on the faculty side, is now my department head. She became my department head. And I immediately filed, I said, I don't want her supervising me. There's a conflict of interest. And so the dean agreed. As soon as I lost the lawsuit, the dean said, okay, she's going to supervise you again. And I said, I'm confused. I sued her all the way to the Supreme Court. That's clearly apparent, the appearance of a conflict of interest. But the dean refused. I appealed to the vice president of research who backed her up. And so now I have my department head is one of the people who had targeted me.
I have to say, Stephen, one of the things that disturbed me and creeped me out about what happened to you was the way that the idea of collegiality was used against you. And we've seen this in many other cases where essentially if you try to defend yourself, and especially if you get angry trying to defend yourself, and it's perfectly understandable why people would get angry when they get into these situations where they're cornered against no way out, then you're labeled a bully, and you're, in your case, written up for having used a curse word at some point in frustration.
Yeah, that was one of mine.
You're not collegial. And this has been used as sort of that fourth pillar. We've written about this at HXA, teaching, research, service, and then people want to add collegiality. And it's a way to kind of fight people who might be making people uncomfortable because they're challenging points of view, because they're defending themselves.
Yeah, I think there's another reason, though, why they push that. And that is, I think my university is pretty common. I'm judged on research, teaching, and service, 40% of my time for research, 40% for teaching, and 20% for service. And what I discovered, I'm not saying like I'm a super rock star, but I do pretty well in all three areas. Students still give me good teaching evaluations, even though they're aware of my politics. When you're pretty strong in those three areas, it's impossible really for the university to get rid of you if you're tenured, because I've worked with some faculty across the university who have been targeted, and the university goes right in for their weak spots. And so I think collegiality is seen as a way to get around that. As someone who is a successful, productive scholar and teacher, well, they can just sort of, collegiality, like, what does that even mean, right? As you pointed out, they can define it all sorts of different ways. So it becomes a very effective weapon against someone who normally would be immune to being fired because on paper they're perfectly productive.
Well, and there are the use of these claims of discrimination and harassment that can be used as they were against Patti. I also want to note that, Patti, you had this bizarre charge at one point made against you by somebody who claimed you violated the Institutional Review Board rules because you had failed to register the course skit with the IRB, when the IRB has nothing to do with classroom teaching. It's just extraordinary to see that kind of thing happen. Patti, there was a question from Mark Crawford about your case. Did your case take the form of a formal investigation of harassment or of discrimination, ultimately?
It started out as harassment. That was I harassing people in a position of lower power, but then they couldn't find any complainant who said they were being harassed.
Right.
So then they switched to content.
Right. And this whole situation of having the post-Sandusky, post-Nassar situation has in some ways empowered the university lawyers to be extremely vigilant and to, in many cases, overreach. I mean, I'll tell you all just a little anecdote. It would relieve the tension, but also speak to how crazy things have gone. My spouse works at Michigan State University, which is, of course, where Larry Nassar did his horrible deeds. And that place now, everybody has to report everybody if they're aware of anything in terms of Title IX violations. So my spouse one day was dealing with me having a serious medical problem, my mother also, and my mother-in-law also. And so he had been on the phone with us all day. And then he got on the phone with his second in command and accidentally at the end of the call said to her, "Love you." And as soon as he hung up, he thought, "Oh God." And so he texted her this long apology and explained, "I've been dealing with family all day and I've been saying love you at the end of everything." And she just wrote back, "Love you too." And he told me it was a mutual assured destruction pact at that point, because technically under the rules, they're supposed to report each other for saying this. That's the level we've gotten to, where there's this kind of sense of constant surveillance. And Patti, you talked about trying to go back to work, but you can't in a situation where nobody will talk to you and everybody's watching you. And Stephen, you've talked about this too, this sort of sense that everybody is watching you all the time, waiting for you to slip up. It's an
Well,
exhausting way to do any kind of free inquiry.
I was one of the few people who was delighted when the pandemic hit. I thought, thank God, because I was already teaching online. I thought, I don't have to go back to campus. And then I got all depressed about a year and a half ago because there's this big push to go back on campus. Then they discovered PCBs in the education building and shut the whole building down a year and a half ago in November. And I'm like, yes. I mean, it's bad. Hundreds of people have died, and I'm actually involved in one of the lawsuits. But now we'll probably get a new building in 3 years. So I'm hoping for an F5 tornado or an earthquake or something at
I was
that
going to
point.
say, if anthrax ends up there, we know that
Yeah,
it's
something's gonna save me. I'm not religious, but I'm beginning to think someone's looking out for me in terms of keeping me away from NC State's campus.
We've got
Let
a question
me,
for all three of you from, oh, sorry, go ahead, Nick.
oh, yes. So it popped up in both one of the questions, and you raised the case of Larry Nassar as well. And I want to note that Larry Nassar, the serial rapist who's now in jail for the rest of his life, was subjected by Michigan State to a Title IX investigation, and the investigation didn't find anything. And this just points to the folly of tenured professors conducting felony investigations and acting like police and district attorneys. And so I think one takeaway is that if there are felonies on campus, the police should investigate, not college communities, not college investigators.
And that relates to the question we've gotten from Martha McCoy for all of you. How do you propose we handle complaints about faculty members engaging in unprofessional and unethical behavior, whether it's sexual harassment, racial discrimination in grading, proselytizing in class, or whatever? These things really do occur sometimes, but clearly students and colleagues are also filing complaints about a range of behaviors that are not actually illegal or unethical. Should a faculty panel review all such complaints just to be sure they're handled without infringing on academic freedom?
Well, can I just say something? We've
Sure.
seen some trends in the university, the corporatization of the university, and where they, now they talk about clients rather than students, and they're, concerned about what are going to be the cash value of degrees and how can we make these. And then there's also this kind of the power of vulnerability. So people who claim vulnerability are now using that as a weapon. And so it's a scary time, because I think one of the problems is that these committees don't come to the accused and get their side of the story. I've seen several people railroaded in this way, and it's, the due process is not being followed.
Mm-hmm.
And the conservative regents of the university wanted to put in an endowed chair of conservative thought. I mean, they're like trying to turn the intellectual takeover of the university.
And Nick or Stephen, do you want to respond to Martha's question? Should there be a faculty review of all such complaints first to make sure they're handled without infringing on academic freedom?
I would certainly welcome a faculty doing an initial review, because I think they have the interests of the faculty in mind much more so than apparatchiks who are there to protect the university. So I think that would be
the police don't understand the culture and the norms and the
Yeah.
practice of universities. I don't think they're the place to go. I think faculty are the place to go. I agree with Nick.
But when they're felonies, the police should be brought in.
We've got a question from Yuka Salobi. Sorry, Yuka, I never say your last name right. Savolanian. Is there a proposal for preventing these kinds of investigations from even starting? It seems there are entire bureaucracies dedicated to these kinds of pseudo concerns. Should HXA perhaps call this out and demand reforms that minimize the resulting harms for learning? There ought to be a high threshold.
Yes, it should.
investigation of this nature, as you know, the process itself is a punishment.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two issues. One is minor issues being trumpeted into these huge deals that have to be addressed, like a skit or my criticism of a diversity question. You know what I'm saying? So that I think that's part of the issue that has to be addressed. And then the second part that was mentioned before was due process. I mean, if you get accused at any of these universities, you're not afforded really due process. It's not a fair process for you. So I think on the one hand, preventing people's time from being wasted with these ridiculous accusations would be part one, and part two would be strengthening the rights of the defendant. I don't know what you're going to do about part one, because the whole campus culture encourages this idea of, oh, this tiny little thing has happened to this person, but it's actually equivalent to this, immense tragedy that we now have to address.
Yeah, that culture clearly has to be changed in order for us to have free inquiry. And that is one of the things HXA is working on. Another question came in. Would the panelists be able to give tips for surviving the death by 1,000 cuts?
Steve, this is you.
Yeah, you should buy the book. And here's why. So I wrote my chapter for Nick, which, by the way, I don't know if I actually thank you for inviting me, Nick. It was quite cathartic to sit down and write this out. I now know why people journal. I'm not a journaling guy, but I understand. So I wrote it, and when you do this, you reflect a lot, and I'm like, I should write kind of lessons learned out of this, because I wish I'd known a lot of this before I started. And so he took my second part of my chapter and broke it off, and it's sort of like the afterword of the book.
Yes.
And it's a series of tips or rules. I don't know if I want to really just read them out loud, but I would refer you to that. Nick liked it so much, he wanted it to be a separate chapter. I think the number one thing I think I mentioned in here is that I think one of the ways faculty get tripped up is they think they're working in this community of scholars, this wonderful university, where people are rational and logical and fair, and you don't seem to understand you're working with a bunch of bloodthirsty. Am I allowed to curse, Alice? It's Heterodox Academy. I should curse. Fucking psychopaths. And I'm talking about the administrators. And this is one of the problems with higher ed. If you've seen, we now have this professional administrative class that didn't exist several decades ago, right? Decades ago, faculty would take turns being department head, and even dean. But now we have this whole professional track of starting with department heads and then moving on, associate deans and all these VPs. And so it really is this kind of hostile group out there that do not really care about faculty. They see faculty either as sort of like children to be managed or cows to be milked in terms of their grant dollars. And you have to understand that. I mean, you're working in kind of a hostile environment, that everything is fine for you for years, and you think you're in this wonderful place, and then you slip up. And again, it's not a left-right thing. The leftists came after me, the conservatives came after Patti, but you do something that attracts the ire of the administrators, and then you're toast. And so you just have to plan accordingly. And I think what happens is you get drawn into this, and people don't realize that they're already under scrutiny, and the administrators are already collecting evidence and trying to target you and get rid of you when you think you're just having a meeting. You're just having like my introductory chat with my new department head. I thought it was a get to know you meeting. It was really a meeting for her to say, "Oh, you're a bully because you criticized this diversity question." And she actually wrote that up in an email to me, and then secretly stuck that email in my personnel file at some point. So that would be my number one tip, is like, wake up and realize what the modern university is like now.
And I think this tip is not in your postscript, but it's not a bad idea to check your personal.
Maybe I should put that in there.
Let me say something here.
Sure.
I was attacked from the left. I was attacked by feminists.
Oh, okay.
But I think that another thing to think about is I sat around waiting for them to come to me to interview me. And I think if I had been more proactive, I knew people who were on this committee, I knew somebody, I could have gone to her, I could have asked, I could have inquired, I could have, instead of waiting. I think that you know, I mean, I think it's great that Stephen was so active, and that's probably why he's still working, and I'm not. But I think that, you know, the university lawyers and you know, their solution is let's make a new administrative, you know, committee and hire more administrators. Yes, the expansion of the administrative class, the disempowerment of the faculty. They don't stand behind us if, you know, a student makes a complaint, or if their parents come and say, you know, my student got a D and I don't like it, and you know, we're going to sue. They take them out and they change the grade. So they don't stand behind the faculty at all.
Yeah, and I think one of the most chilling and frustrating things is when you figure out that they kind of have infinite resources compared to you in terms of money. So there's
Yes.
essentially no limit in terms of how much the university can spend on your case versus how much you can spend on your case. And it's a really disturbing revelation when you realize the group called University Council doesn't at all represent you. It represents the administration, and that's it, not you. And they actually will work against you in these cases. We have a voted question. It seems like the bigger issue is why students embrace the concept that anything that hurts their feelings, makes them uncomfortable, challenges their beliefs, or creates stress as a form of violence against them. Words have now become clubs instead of tools for dialogue and constructive debate. Not really a question, but a comment.
They should just go read John Haidt and Greg Lukianoff's book about the coddling of the American mind, which is not incontrovertible, and but certainly provides a compelling explanation for why students react to words in this way.
It does, and at the same time, I think that we underestimate how students figure out that this is a form of power, and
Yes.
it's enjoyable to them to use it.
Yes.
I mean, if you've been coddled your whole life, and if your parents helicopter you, you know, I've had parents call me all the time to complain about a student grade on a paper, or I caught somebody cheating and she thinks he shouldn't get failed. He should just, you know, get some other, like, you know, who are you? If the students are raised like this, they're, you know, everybody tells me in the high schools, they're lazy, they're, you know, vulnerable, they, you know, they're coddled, and then they get to college and they're more so, and they use that, you know, I mean, we learn as sociologists that words have power. We respect that, but then, and, you know, we care about that, but then they use them, like you said, as clubs.
But again, I mean, I think even for ones that are not necessarily coddled, this is a way to enjoy an enormous amount of attention and power, right? I think the narcissist problem is one we've not talked about enough in terms of the attacks that occur on academics. That a lot of the activists external to the academy and also internal to the academy are using these kinds of opportunities because it brings them, as they see, as glory and championing of some important cause.
Students have learned to use Title IX as a verb. So if you feel mistreated by your your lover, boyfriend, or girlfriend, well, now you can just file complaints against him, and he may be exonerated in the long run, but he's going to be through a lot of suffering to get to that point.
So Mark Crawford asked to all the panelists, is confidentiality of investigations one of the things being weaponized? One could win a great free speech victory, but then get punished if you try to talk about it.
I think so. At my university, the grievance hearings are confidential, so you're not allowed to discuss what takes place. Now, I think I'm fine discussing the outcome as I did here, but in theory, if I wanted to talk about some of the things my department had said or other people, that would put me at risk. And so yeah, I think absolutely. There's no reason for that rule. Or if you're going to have that rule, the person who filed the grievance can waive it if they want, but it turns out they don't have that power. They can ask for it to be made public, but the grievance panel has to agree. And the grievance panel always gets chosen to the university's advantage. So
yeah, it's a very Orwellian situation in many cases. An anonymous listener asked, but can you trust your colleagues to be balanced, especially when many of them are on the side of the students in these cases? This is referencing the question of, could we have faculty panels to do an initial review to make sure that academic freedom is not being stomped on? Can you trust your colleagues to be balanced?
No.
I agree, no.
All right, question from Tony Webster. It seems to me we have a potent combination of student/peer fragility and administrative cowardice. For all speakers, what practical advice do you have for heterodox educators who may be at risk of or in the early stages of some sort of controversy or complaints? So what would you tell somebody who's in the early stages of danger?
Get a lawyer right off the bat.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Nick, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. That I would also say refuse meetings. Refuse to take meetings, unless you're absolutely compelled to. I think I got out of my initial Title IX case because I just said I'm out of state. I'm out of state indefinitely. And, so I think that's to the extent you can do that, it puts you in a better position.
You got to be careful though, because then they can get
Yeah.
you for insubordination. But what you
Right.
can do is
Yeah.
just say, what's the goal of this meeting? What do you hope to accomplish?
Yeah.
They never want to give you any details. That's the one thing I've learned. They say, hey, can we talk? Hey, can we meet? And they say, what's it about? Oh, want to talk about this. And it's always very vague. And so if you put it on them, say, what do you want to accomplish by having this meeting? It puts them on the spot. And at
Yeah.
least you can go in a little prepared. And then say, well, should I bring my attorney? But yeah, that's the one thing from talking to the couple of faculty I've helped on campus through the local AUP chapter. They made a lot of mistakes early on, and it's just like, hire an attorney. Yes, it's expensive, but think about how much
I would
money you
add,
make.
too, start documenting, right?
Yes, yeah.
You don't want to become paranoid, but start keeping a file that very explicitly gives names, dates, and support for what it is you've experienced. So keep track of those emails, print them out, put them all in a file, and have a running folder about what it is that's going on, because that's going to help you if it gets to the point of an investigation, or you have to file a grievance, or you have to get a lawyer. These kinds of things will help you. It also, frankly, helps you see where things are going, and it helps you make sense of the problem and the trajectory. So I think it's really important to do, partly because it helps you keep your balance. It's very easy to be just totally thrown off balance by these kinds of things, and to feel lost and angry and to lash out. It's because these are such disorienting experiences.
That's why the attorney is very helpful.
Yeah. Can I add a couple of things
Sure.
first to safeguard your career? Read what Stephen wrote at the end of the book. Figure out if you are in a one-party state for recording, and record everything. If you're not in a one-party state, ask for permission to record it. Contact fire. Contact AAUP. The AAUP guidelines stipulate that a jury with your peers. If you don't have that, if your university isn't giving you that, AAUP will get involved. Finally, stop using your university email. If you're at a public school, it is a matter of public record and can be FOIA'd. So too are any transcripts or recordings of your Zoom calls. If you're at a public school, we're going to get in a few years a wave of great scandals related to faculty COVID Zooms. People who didn't realize that their Zoom transcripts are part of the public record.
All right, well, Nick, your audio just went out.
Oh, sorry. In a few years, we're going to get a wave of amazing scandals because faculty didn't realize their Zoom transcripts are part of the public record and subject to Freedom of Information Act, seizures. So use Gmail or some other private service for anything concerned with your case.
I'm going to ask you in a minute, because we're getting a little
Yeah.
bit short on time, to give us your final thoughts, and also tell us anything besides this excellent book, Professor Speak Out, The Truth About Campus Investigations, that you want to point people to. But we have a question from an anonymous attendee. Let's say you're subject to one of these investigations, but you were found not at fault by your supervisor. That said, you still have to work with folks who accused you anonymously, and you don't even know who accused you. How do you go about continuing to work with your peers when you don't know who has actually accused you and caused you this heartache?
I haven't been in a room with my colleagues in 6 years. That's how.
Yeah, I mean, teaching online. I mean, I have been. I go to the all, because again, I know I've got a target on my back. So I go to our all college meetings, which are held in person, and we have some department meetings that are now being held in person. For me, it's Stoic philosophy where you just focus on what you can control and stuff you can't. And it's like, I can't control these people. I'm not going to let them live in my head rent free. I did that early on, had to see a therapist for a while because it's extraordinarily stressful, right, Patty? I mean, it's like you can't understand the stress when you realize some of your colleagues and your bosses all want you terminated. Part of it too is I focus on I'm grateful for the job. I mean, it's still a pretty good job. You know, I get paid a really good salary. I still have time to do research on stuff I want. I'm gonna leave in a few weeks. I have a visiting professorship at a university in Japan. I'll be there for 2 months. And so kind of focusing on the positive. And then part of it too is just realizing, this is what I said before, realizing you're like Indiana Jones in the first movie where he's falling in this pit that you're surrounded by snakes, and just, make sure you got a torch and a whip to keep the snakes away, and just smile and keep up with your job, but just don't forget that you're surrounded by snakes.
What a happy thought.
Well, I mean, this is what I mean is you have to realize what the modern university is like. It's not this touchy-feely image a lot of us have that we originally, when we were in graduate school, that kind of inspired us when we were getting our PhDs. It's changed. As Patty said, it's become very corporate, and you'll do fine unless you open your mouth and make some sort of a misstep. And we can sit there and moan and groan about it, or just realize that's just the way it is. I mean, that's just what the modern university is like nowadays.
But that's, I mean, almost the tragedy. You don't even have to misstep, as in Patty's case, and you can still get in trouble even misstep, right? And what you said was not a misstep. It was a legitimate opinion about a conference.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Misstep is keep your mouth shut. That's, I guess, what I'm saying. Don't say anything. Just be mute in faculty meetings, and you'll be fine, hopefully.
That's not where Heterodox Academy hopes we go. We hope we
know. But I'm giving the advice, and in particular for young faculty, if you don't have tenure. I mean, I did have the luxury of being a full professor when they went after me. It would have been very, very different if I'd been an assistant professor. But I mean, they're the realities, Alice. I understand what Heterodox wants to do, but the reality I'm getting from some of the questions are like, but we're in the trenches, right? We're fighting. How do we stay alive is how I'm interpreting a couple of the questions we got.
I get you. I quit my job at Northwestern over censorship and did not go back to the academy for all the reasons you're describing. So believe me, I get it. When I took this job at Heterodox, it was the most extraordinary feeling because I realized these people want me because I got in trouble.
Nice.
It was an amazing feeling, but in most of the academy, that's not what they want. You can't move on to another job, and it's a tragedy. So
it would be nice if there was, I mean, I never heard of FIRE. I never heard of any of these other places, and I got a very bad lawyer. It would be nice if there was some way to know what the resources were. This book is a great thing because it's somewhere you can at least look and see what's going on and what other people have done and how they've fought it. But there was nobody even at my school who suggested this as a resource.
yes. Any final thoughts? We're down to the last minute or so. I want to, like Patty and the rest of the panelists, recommend this book, Professors Speak Out: The Truth About Campus Investigations. I think it's an eye-opening, shocking, but also incredibly helpful text in terms of understanding the environment.
I just want to thank you, Alice, and thanks, Heterodox, for putting on this webinar. And despite its problems, I still love being an academic, and it's still, a vital institution for American society. People still want to come here from all over the world to study. So it's worth saving.
You're here. Stephen or Patty, any last thoughts? Again, sorry.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Alice, for giving us the opportunity to shed light on these very damaging things. The university has become so politicized.
Absolutely. It's a real honor to be with all of you, and I'm just so appreciative. We're so appreciative of the work that you've done, and please just keep speaking out. It's just incredibly important work. Finally, I just want to thank Marisa Hart, who's our staff member who puts all of these events together for us and does all of the heavy lifting. Thank you again, the three of you, for being with us. And folks, do check out this book and consider coming to Heterodox Academy's conference next month in New York City, where there will be a panel on this very topic. But in addition to that, you'll meet a lot of folks who've been through these issues. That's how they come to Heterodox Academy. So the peer support is really extraordinary there. And that's a great reason to go, is to talk to other people who've been through these things.